Welcome to the Retro Graveyard. Today we're taking a look at the Tony Hawk Ride skateboard controller. Let's get to it. When I was growing up and playing video games as a kid in the late 90s and 2000s, the name Tony Hawk had just as much relevance to video games as like Mario or Sonic did. I know, it's hard to imagine at this point just how huge the Tony Hawk's Pro Skater series was. Neversoft was a company that absolutely knew how to make a great game that can stand the test of time. But when sales eventually started slipping after 8 or 9 or so games, publisher Activision decided to put Neversoft on the hip trendy new thing, which was peripheral-based gaming at the time, specifically the Guitar Hero series. Neversoft took over that. So what happened to the Tony Hawk series? Well, Activision decided to pass it off onto a brand new developer, Robomodo, which was actually made up of former EA and Midway employees. Their very first project ever was called Tony Hawk Ride, a peripheral-based skateboarding game. A game that promised to deliver the adrenaline rush and danger of skateboarding with the fun of video games. At the time of its release, the Activision head of marketing said, "Tony Hawk Ride is a massive step forward for the franchise and the gaming industry as a whole. The skateboard controller will redefine sports games by offering players a true skateboarding experience." Tony Hawk himself even said that they were hoping that this controller wouldn't just be for Tony Hawk Ride, but would be a standard platform going forward for other games like surfing and snowboarding games maybe. So they had some very, very high hopes for this game, and in particular the skateboard controller, to say the very least. So how did they do? Well, let's take a look at the skateboard controller itself. It's generally skateboard shaped in size. Here it is compared to an 8-inch board. It's got all the standard console controller buttons on the side. This is the Xbox edition, of course. There's a oversized start button here that you're supposed to hit with your foot, but I find I can never do it reliably. And you'll see that's actually a reoccurring thing with this controller. And strangely, even though those buttons are there, you can't use them in the menus and stuff. You're required to use the controller so often, which is aggravating. Inside the deck, there's accelerometers that allegedly determine the board's movements. Considering this thing is made out of plastic, it feels pretty solid. I think you'd have a really hard time breaking it. And this faux grip tape on the top is pretty nice. I think they found a nice balance between it being not too grippy and not too slippy. It's nowhere near as grippy as actual grip tape. Skateboarder Aaron Cairo from the YouTube channel Braille Skateboarding even drilled trucks into it and actually skated it and it held up, so that's very impressive. There's a little IR blaster / receiver on each side of the deck, so you're supposed to be able to put your hand by one of those sensors to simulate grabbing, and that's also what senses your foot pushing past the board. And you know what? That aspect works really well. Unfortunately, that can't be said about all of it. Now, it's hard to determine exactly how much of it is the game's fault and how much of it is the controller's fault, but the experience is pretty unresponsive. You know what? I gave it an honest try. I really tried to be objective here because it has such a bad reputation. But there's no getting around the fact that this controller is just unreliable and inaccurate. A lot of the times it feels like it senses that you're doing something, it just doesn't know exactly what you're doing. It is almost impossible to do the same thing twice. In other words, it feels like it's random, like the board knows that you're moving, it just doesn't know what exactly you're trying to do. And it gets worse than that. There's this one type of trick in the game called a flick trick, and I must have tried 50 times, upwards of 50 times, to try to do this trick. And all you have to do is lift the board up like you're ollieing, that's how you ollie in the game, and then you move it to like a 45-degree angle and then snap it back down, and that's supposed to do a flick trick. And I could never get it to register. Now maybe I'm doing something wrong, but the very fact that I'm trying to figure out if I'm doing something wrong or if it's something wrong with a board or if this is just how it is just a testament to how half-baked this thing is. And yes, I tried recalibrating the board and everything, but it didn't work. Sega's arcade game Top Skater came out like over a decade before Ride, and even that controlled better. From what I remember anyway. And all that isn't even touching on the problems with the game itself. It severely lacks content compared to all the Neversoft releases we were used to at the time. It is plagued with long loading times. and the game has this cartoony graphical style, which is just baffling because Neversoft was going into this more realistic direction along with the rest of the industry, and they decided to just do a complete 180. I don't think this art style appealed to the demographic they should have been focusing on at the time. You know, a motion-controlled skateboarding game is not inherently a terrible idea, but this one was executed poorly enough to kill one of gaming's most beloved franchises basically forever. Every Tony Hawk game release after this one has not lived up to the standard that Neversoft set. That's about it for this one, guys. Did you have one of these things? Let me know what you thought of it in the comments. Were you a sad, disappointed kid on Christmas who opened this thing to find out that it does not work very well? Let me know. And rest in peace, Neversoft.